Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. We are going to start with Good Economics for Hard Times, written by Nobel Prize, who has won Nobel Prize in Economics, Nobel laureate Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo. The entire book will be covered in the session, but in this first session, as of today, only chapter number 1 and little bit introduction of chapter number 2 will be covered. It won't be possible to read the entire book. For that, you can go and search for an audio book. I'll be reading a few paragraphs and we'll be trying to understand what we can learn from the first chapter, as well as it gives a clear concept about the nations who frame economic policies and how the taxes they affect the citizens life, and many things are mentioned in this book. It is a very interesting book. So it has been reclaimed by many authors, as you can see on the screen, by Raghuram Rajan, our ex-governor Thomas, and by Thomas Piketty. So without wasting time, let's just jump into the topic. Chapter number 1, Make Economics Great Again. It starts with a very light-hearted joke, a conversation between woman and a doctor, wherein the woman says that she only has half a year to live, and the doctor advises her that if you marry an economist, that half a year will seem pretty long. Okay, so a very light-hearted joke. Moving further, he has stated about many countries in the world like Philippines, United States, United Kingdom of Brazil, Indonesia to Italy, and in every country, whatever is happening and whatever the growth rate is, as well as the quality of life and the negativity that is around because of politics. 81% of those who identify with one party have negative opinion about other party. Example he has given of republics and democrats in USA, wherein both the parties have negative image about the other party. They will be always taunting and talking negatively about other parties. So this has been seen not only in USA but all over the world: France, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, whichever country you can name, it is a common thing. Now, talking about civilization in France and India, two other countries where we spent a lot of time. So, Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee have researched a lot on this book. While before writing this book, they have researched a lot, and the main countries that are covered inside this book is France and India. But since I'm in the second chapter now, I'm reading the second chapter currently. So many knowledge is there about all countries, but in-depth knowledge is there about France and India. Moving forward, for what we understand, what determines trust in economics, a part of the answer is that there are plenty of bad economics around. That's why the name of the book is Good Economics for Bad Times. So many examples are given, as in how business, how many big business has gone out of business. Many examples and real examples are given. So we'll move forward with without wasting time. He has covered this. He has compared this book with Big Bang Theory about economics. Anyone who has watched the TV series of Big Bang Theory knows that it's looked down on engineers. They have deep thoughts. Engineers muck around with materials and try to give shape to these thoughts, or at least that's how the series presents it. So he has covered like the real workers as well as the economists. What is the difference between them? Economists are more like plumbers. We solve problems with a combination of intuitions grounded in science, some guesswork aided by experience, and a bunch of pure trial and error. So very beautifully he has said that economists learn and their work is totally about trial and error. He has also called economists as social scientists. I like that word which he has used, terming economics as social scientists. Okay, so this was about the first 3 pages, wherein it is just a brief introduction, and it is only a pro forma and a very small thing that he has covered in the first few pages, so that the readers do not get demotivated or they should not feel that it is a very big book, it is a very tough book to read, I should have knowledge about economics. No, it is not like that. Any layman can take this book and read, and they can have pure knowledge about things. So moving forward, like social scientists, page number 2. As social scientists, our job is to offer facts and interpretation of the facts. We hope that will meditate these divides, help each other understand what the other is saying. So mostly in the first chapter, he has covered about what are the differences between many countries and what are the core beliefs of the people, how gender is differentiated, how inequality is there, and from immigration it is total. In the second chapter, we are going to totally study about immigration, but the first chapter is just about the shrinking economy. What makes current situation particularly worrying is that the space for such conversation seems to be shrinking. There seems to be tribalization of view, not just about politics, but also about what main social problems are and what to do about them. So now, right now, we are on page number 2. Page number 1 I covered, and now we are on page number 2. The large-scale survey found Americans' view on broad spectrum of issue comic together like bunches of grapes. People who share some core beliefs, say about gender roles or whether hard work always lead to success, seem to have same opinion on range of issues, from immigration to trade, from inequality to taxes, to the role of government. These core beliefs are better predicators of their policies views than their income, their demographic groups, or whether they live. These issues. So now he's talking about immigration issue, he's talking about inequality of taxes that people have to pay. They are not just in United States, okay? They are all around the world. Immigration, trade taxes, and role of government are just as contested in Europe, India, South Africa, or Vietnam. But views on these issues are all too often based entirely on the affirmation of specific personal values. And when they are bolstered by anything, it is by made up numbers and very simplistic readings of the fact. Nobody really thinks very hard about the issue themselves. This is really quite disastrous because we have seen to have fallen hard times. They go years of global growth, fed by trade expansion, and China's amazing economic success may be over. What with China's growth slowing and trade wars igniting everywhere, countries that prospered from the rising trade in Asia, Africa, and Latin America are beginning to wonder what is next for them. China has become very successful in the past 20 years. Nobody thought that a country from Asia will be ruling the world in the future. But yeah, that is the truth. West slow growth is nothing new at this point. What makes it particularly worrying is the rapid fraying of social contract that we'll see across the country. We seem to be back in Kinston world of hard times, with the haves facing off against the increasingly alienated have-nots, with no resolution of sides. Questions of economics and economic policies are central to the present crisis. There is something that can be done to boost growth. Is there something that can be done to boost growth? Should that even be a priority for the affluent West? And what else? What about exploding inequality everywhere? Is international trade the problem or the solution? What is the effect on inequality? What is the future on trade, and can countries with cheaper labor cost lure global manufacturing away from China? A very big question and a question that usually you can't see on the news or anywhere when you read. That can any country a labor cost offer labor costs that are cheaper than China? Presently, China is ruling the world because of only one reason. Their labor cost is very cheap, because of which they have built up an empire of manufacturing and selling products all around the world. But is this the end? Like no other country has labor. Why we are not able to procure this thing that China has procured? India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and other Asian countries being developing country and being a heavily populated country, why are we not able to offer labor at cheap cost than China? So that is a very big question. Should we, for example, worry about the rise of artificial intelligence or celebrate it? A very, very beautiful thing which is covered in the further chapters. Intelligence is as important as of now, where poverty is still existing in the world. It is just that we don't like poor people. And the same, the government also, they don't like poor people and they don't care about poor people because they can't get taxes from the poor people. Talking about all the government of the world. And perhaps more urgently, how can society help all those people the markets have left behind? Many people are not covered inside the market. The people who are living in the rural area, they don't get even the basic amenities, even the basic facilities and the basic products that are easily available in the urban areas. The answer to this problem take more than a tweet. So nowadays, what happens? All the presidents around the world, all the prime ministers around the world, they just put in a tweet, and the problem is solved, isn't it? So that is what is mocked over here. So there is an urge to avoid them. And partly as a result, nations are doing very little to solve the most pressing challenges of our time. They continue to feed the anger and distrust that polarizes us, which makes us even more incapable of talking, thinking together. A very, very beautiful concept that has been explained, thinking together. We as citizens of country belonging to any country, we don't think together. We have different point of view of things. Doing something about them, it often feels like a vicious cycle. Economists have a lot to say about these big issues. To study immigration to see what do wages, taxes to determine if they discourage enterprise, redistribution to figure out whether it encourages sloth. They think about what happens when nations trade and have useful prediction about who are the winners and losers are likely to be. They have worked hard to understand why some countries grow and others do not and others don't. And what, if anything, governments can do to help. They gather data on what makes people generous or wary, what makes a man leave his home for a strange place, how social media plays in our prejudices. The very real time and a pressing issue which has been covered over here. Many people, not only from one particular country, from all particular country, people go to other country for work. Leaving his hometown, these people they have to shift abroad. Leaving his or her hometown, the place where the person is born and brought up, is not able to get employment, is not able to get a job in his or her own country. That forces that person to leave that country and go and hunt for a job in some strange place, in some country wherein he or she is not aware about the language, the culture, and if some problem arises, they are in total problem. And to bring them back becomes so difficult that whatever hard earned money that person has earned, everything goes down the drain. What the most recent research has to say, it turns out, is often surprising, especially to those used to pat answers coming out of TV, economists, and high school textbooks. It can shed a new light on those debates. Unfortunately, very few people trust economists, though, to listen carefully to what they have to say. Right before the Brexit vote, our colleagues in UK desperately tried to warn the public that Brexit would be costly, but they felt they were not going through. They, economics, and 1,000 regular Americans answered the same 20 questions. They found economists were much in favor of raising federal taxes from 97.4 percentage to 66 from 66 to 97.4 percentage. They also had much more faith in policies pursued by government after 2008 crisis than public at large. On the other hand, 67% of regular Americans but only 39% of professional economists agree with the idea that CEO of large companies were overpaid. So as you can see, a rift in the thinking of economics themselves. The key finding is that overall the average academic economist thinks very differently from the average American. Across all 20 questions, the questionnaire was made of 20 questions. There is a gapping chance of 35 percentage points between how many economists agree with a particular statement and how many Americans do. So, a little bit he has covered about economics over here and how they are thinking and how good their point of views are. Moving forward, he has also said that economics and politicians were rated at top down at the bottom rather than being on top. They have been rated below the bottom. Below the bottom, starting with politicians and above politicians, directly economists are there. Public have different views about economics and they're always right. We economists that he's talking about himself are often too wrapped up in our models and our methods and sometimes forget where science ends and ideology begins. We answer policy questions based on assumptions, a very important word, assumption. Economics is totally based on assumption that have become second nature to us because they are building blocks of our model and it does not mean that they are always correct. Whichever theory you take in economics, it will have an assumption. Since it is having an assumption, that means it has totally left the economics behind in thinking the correct way. But we have also have useful expertises no one else has. The goal of this book is to share some of this expertise and reopen a dialogue with the most urgent and divisive topics of our time. We'll little bit talk about whenever we are talking about economics. Okay, so what do economics do? They predict the future, isn't it? Just like an astrologer, people whenever they call economics for an interview or whenever they ask them questions, it is always about tell us what the future holds. What will happen after 5 years? What will happen after 50 years? After 100 years? Isn't it? But they actually do a pretty poor job of predicting, in part because prediction are often well nigh impossible, which is why most academic economists stay away from futurology. So he has used this word futurology. One of the jobs of IMF is to forecast the rate of growth of the world economy. Everybody is aware about this. The role of IMF is to forecast the rate of world economy in the near future. Without a whole lot of success, one might add, despite its team of many well trained economists. The Economist magazine once computed how far the IMF forecasts were off on average over the period of 2000 to 2014. So the forecast doesn't always works out 2% to 10% every year, but about as bad as assuming a constant growth rate of 4%. Another big factor that contributes to trust gap is that academic economists hardly ever take time to explain the concept reason behind the more nuanced conclusion. How did they pass through the many impossible alternative interruption of interpretation of the evidence? What were the dot? often from different domains. They had to connect to reach to the most plausible answer. So that's what he's talking about. They're talking about how economics do not remove time in order to explain the policy details to the general public. It takes a lot of effort to be heard properly. So now he's coming to the real story, whatever we are facing, and how we know that things are happening around the world. He's talking over here about TV anchors. Okay, whenever we want to know about a particular news, who tells us that particular news? The TV anchor. Either we watch it on YouTube or we watch it on our TV. Nobody takes care to read the newspaper because now nobody has time. Everybody is engaged being online and their mind is offline. Both of us have to wrangle with TV anchors to tell the full story. So whenever they were interviewed, they were asked only a particular question, because of which they avoided many interviews. So we recognize why academic economists are often unwilling to take a responsibility of speaking out. So during this interview span of 1 to 2 hours also, all half-baked things are told because the policy details, the ideology, and the development of a country, the inequality gaps, whatever is there in the mind of the economist, they are not able to tell it to openly to the public because the time period needed is a vast time period is needed, which cannot be covered in a hour or two. It takes a lot of effort to be heard properly, and there is always the risk of sounding half-baked or having one's careful words manipulated to mean something quite different. The meaning of these three lines is that whenever we are explaining things to particular people, like if there is a marriage at your place, and after the marriage, like after 2 to 3 years, if you want to explain that marriage, it will be difficult for you. You may say that, yeah, the marriage was good, everything went properly, but what all things are there inside, you need time for it. In the same way, he has told that whenever we are talking to TV anchors, whenever we are coming on TV, and whenever we are interviewed, we cannot explain the entire thing. And even if we explain, even if we use some words, it becomes different, and people take it in a different way. There are, of course, who do speak out, but they tend to be with very important exceptions, those who with the strongest opinion and the least patience for engaging with the best modern economics. Some too beholden to some orthodoxy to pay attention of any fact does not square it. Repeats old ideas like mantra, even though they have been long disapproved. Others are those to pause con or maintain stream economics, which it may sometimes deserve. So he has compared this with Big Bang Theory. Anyone who has watched the comic series of Big Bang Theory knows about it, which I've already covered. We are on page number 8 now, wherein we'll be talking about carbon taxes, how CEOs' pay might affect the taxes, where to raise a lot, what universal basic income would do to the structure of employment, a very different concept that is universal basic income. They are not talking about a particular country, but they are talking about an entire globe. They are talking about. Everyone gets things wrong. What is dangerous is not making mistakes, but to be so enamored by one's point of view that one does not let facts get in the way. To make progress, we have to constantly go back to the fact, acknowledge our errors, and move on. Many people don't do this. They don't acknowledge the facts, and they keep on making errors in the same way that they were making. Besides, there's plenty of good economics around. Good economics starts with troubling facts. Make some guesses based on what we already know about human behavior, and theories elsewhere shown to work uses data to test those guesses, refines Its line of attack based on new set of facts and eventually with some luck gets into the solution. In this, our work is also a lot like medical research. Siddhartha Mukherjee, wonderful book on fight against cancer. The Emperor of Maladies tells the story of combining inspired guesswork with careful testing. And many rounds of continuing further, at one level, one could think about this book as a report from the trenches where the research happens. So over here, he's talking about a different book which is related to the book that he has written. It is important that this project will be guided by an expansion notion of what human beings want and what constitutes a good life. Economics is not only about policy, economics is not only about taxes or the growth rate. Many of them, whenever they are reading economics or whenever they are having a concept of economics, they do feel that it is about growth rate, it is about numbers. But the main thing, this line covers the entire book. Human beings want, the want of human beings, what really human beings want, what constitutes the good life. For centuries, we have been living in urban area, in developed area, and then to somewhere we feel that we have not lived a fulfilled life. If you ask an old age person from any developed country or a developing country, they will always have this thing inside their mind that they have not lived a fulfilled life and their wants were not satisfied on time. Economics have a tendency to adopt a notion of well-being that is often too narrow, some versions of income or material consumption, and yet all of us need much more than that to have a fulfilling life. The respect of community, the comfort of family and friends. Such an important point. We all like to belong to a community. We all like to spend time with our community because that is where we actually belong. The comfort of family and friends. Whenever we like to share something, whenever we are happy or whenever we are sad, we want family and friends around. So over here, he's not becoming philosophical. Okay, dignity. One loses his or her dignity when they are leaving their home country and they are going and working in some place which does not belongs to them. They are not treated good over there. They are looked like second class citizens. They're treated as second class citizens, isn't it? So this is not philosophical. He is not going philosophical over here at all. The thing over here is what a person really wants in life. Whenever he's growing up in the place that he or she is brought up, they want respect from the community. They want family and friends around whenever they are sick, whenever they are in good health. Okay, they want these people around so that family and friends around so that they can live a life that is more strong, more valuable, and more that can be remembered at the end of the life. Last page, page number 9, about lightness, about pleasure, a place where where the person gets pleasure, where the person grows every day. Okay, there is negativity everywhere, but being with family, friends, belonging to a proper community where you actually belong, and having these things around, it is a pleasure in life. The focus on income alone, it happens all around the world, and in the next chapter also we are going to talk about this only. That income in today's world, people only and only concentrate on income, and they don't mind about anything else. So it is a mockery wherein as soon as a kid grows up, they are asked to leave the country and go somewhere else and work in order to earn better and send money home. That means that that small kid who has just grown up, okay, he or she may be living a very different life, settling abroad, and the family is only and only interested in getting money out of that kid. And after the kid grows up, that time they realize that they have left everything and they have no way to come back because they are getting respect in their community, they are getting the things needed only because they are working abroad. So this is a sad thing which is going around the world, especially in developing countries, especially in Asia. wherein we look at a person only and only from income point of view. You go, you work anywhere you want, but you bring back income. So that is a wrong thing. Leaving all the attachments, leaving all the emotional attachments, and going to a place all by their own. So it brings down the productivity of the employee. It brings down the productivity of the citizen. If that citizen could have stayed in the same country, whichever country he or she belongs, that citizen would have been much productive than the citizen who has left the country and has become and has migrated to any other country. Has led the focus on income alone is not just a convenient shortcut. It is a distorting lens that often has led the smartest economy down the wrong path, policymakers to wrong decision, and too many of us to wrong obsessions. Obsession about things, obsession about world, obsession about what people talk about us. It is what pursued so many of us that the whole world is waiting at the door to take our well-paying jobs. We often think that if I leave this particular job, if I don't go, somebody else will get this job. Okay, that is also a very wrong concept. Persuades us that the whole world, if I don't go, somebody else will take that job. Is that what has led to single-minded focus on restoring the Western nation to some glorious past of past economic growth? Exactly. This is the main reason why the West has grown so much, because citizens from less developed country, from developing country, from least developed country, they go and they spend their entire life developing some other countries. That is the main reason because of which they have gloriously grown and they have become fastest growing economy of the world. This is what makes us simultaneously deeply suspicious of those who don't have money and terrified to find ourselves in their shoes. Many citizens, they look at each other and they predict that this person is not having money because he didn't leave the country, and they look at the other person that person is coming from abroad and he's having good money in his pocket, he's building a bigger house. So the thing is, by looking at each other, these things are happening. We don't have money and we find ourselves terrified. We look at that person and we predict our future, that if I stay in this country, even my situation will be the same. It is also what makes the trade-off between the growth of economies and the survival of the planet seems so stark. The better conversation must start by acknowledging the deep human desire for dignity and human contact, isn't it? That is what we are losing day by day. Dignity for each other and human contact, having instead of having technological contact, human contact, and to treat it is not a distraction but a better way to understand each other. Majority of the problem is arising only because we are not able to understand each other and to set ourselves free from what appeared to be intraceable oppositions. Restoring human dignity to its central place, we argue in this book, sets off a profound rethinking of economic priorities and the way in which societies care for their members, particularly when they are in need. That said, on any single issue we will cover in this book, or perhaps all of them. So, dignity of human beings, restoring human dignity to its central place. This is not the way we were living centuries back. Centuries back, every person had their own dignity in their particular community. But now that dignity seems to be losing, and it is totally based on what amount of income a person is earning. That is a dignity that is given to a person. So this is totally wrong, and this is what policymakers do not keep into mind. This is what government, when they implement policy, they never think about all these things. So the first chapter, that is making economy great again, the author has spoken about many things that are related to economic policy, about IMF. Okay, examples about migration, about income, and about TV anchors who brainwash people's mind, and people do look at them as their last source of option. bank bailouts. He has also spoken about many countries. He has spoken about many examples. He has spoken about international trade and about China, the China manufacturing hub of the world. And lastly, about social scientists determining and naming economists as social scientists. So this brings us to the end of the lecture. Thank you everyone for listening. Share and subscribe my channel. If you have any doubt, you can put in the comment box. I'll be replying to it, or else you can mail me on my email ID. I'll be replying you personally.